Everyone loves when their good deeds get noticed, when a leader acknowledges, particularly in front of our peers, a job well done. As a leader, many of us make it a point to endorse a teammate's work because we know the value it has for that person's morale. At IBL, we recognize humility as a pattern of sacrificial works that are happening outside the public eye. Dave Dietz and Don Phelan give some surprising insight into why we might highlight someone else's good work. I suspect you might be as shocked as I am to hear what they have to say on this episode of Leadership for Today.
So we have our topic for today, as Tim has already introduced, is this idea around wanting to do something for somebody else, but yet at the same time, how do we handle the recognition that comes along with it? How do we handle our motives around that recognition, the publicity of a particular recognition? And so the question that comes to us today revolves around a leader who is wanting to recognize someone on their team. And the heart of their question is it still a matter of humility if I bring attention to that, trying to simply give recognition to that person? Or do I somehow come across as arrogant or proud if I'm giving recognition to them? How do I handle this? How do I make sure people on my team get the proper recognition I want them to have? And ultimately, as Tim has kind of alluded to, we're going to talk about that at IBL. We would argue that humility in a leader is seen in a pattern of sacrificial works that are happening outside of the public eye. And so that's kind of what we want to talk about today, and really kind of engage in a conversation around that. And so I'll make a couple of comments and then maybe turn it over to you, Dawn, as we kind of work our way through this. So as we think about this, and I think it's a legit question for people to ask, because as leaders, I think it's a great thing that we want to recognize those people that work for us. That's a biblical process. That's a biblical action to take. Proverbs chapter 3 reminds us that give honor where honor is due. And so I think I would say, first of all, to that leader, that's a beautiful thing that you want to honor somebody on your team. That's a biblical thing. That's a great example. But the question then comes into our motives. And as far as how we address that, how we deal with that in a public setting. And so as we think about our motives and we think about our actions, we go to a couple of different passages, and this is where I'd like to start getting your take on a passage in Matthew chapter 6, and then a passage in Philippians 2. So maybe, Dawn, if you kind of want to give us some initial thoughts there and talk us through some of that.
Sure. The Matthew 6 passage talks about beware of practicing your righteous deeds before other people in order that they can be seen by other people, that we are not to let our right hand know what our left hand is doing, because God is going to reward us for the things that we do. So in that situation, we are looking at why the recognition. I mean, God is going to give us our reward. And so why are we wanting to recognize that other person? Do we want to just lift them up? Do we want to reward them for doing the good job that they did? But does it need to be public? Is it just between you and them that it needs to happen? What is the motivation behind why you feel that they should be recognized? Or is it even to make you look good as their leader? Would be another motivation that gets us into trouble sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's easy for us to start off with good motives, but also realize we can, quote unquote, cash in on the recognition from the person that we're recognizing. I think from a negative testimony in my own life, I remember when I was in college, I had a group of guys that were kind of under my mentorship and overseeing them. And one day I decided to buy them all donuts. I thought that would be a really cool thing. College guys, you can't go wrong with buying. That's right. You can't go wrong with buying guys donuts. And but yet I remember at the time in a public manner, asking them, hey, did you guys appreciate the donuts that I bought? And knowing probably that, hey, I wanted to make sure that they got them and they recognized that. But also there was an element that, well, I can kind of get pulled along too in this recognition. And wow, Dave, thank you so much for getting us donuts. And you look at a passage like Matthew 6, like you just talked about, and you realize, we lose that reward. We lose the actual thing that we're trying to accomplish. It really becomes void and null when we do things to be pulled along, if you will, in that recognition. So that's a interesting passage in Matthew chapter 6 to look at and to think about. What about
very humbling? That's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. How about Philippians chapter 2? Thinking verses 3 and 4 that maybe help us think through some of these things as well.
Yeah, this is a passage that we use a lot in the counseling room, in consulting, because we use it for our guardrails for communication. We use it for our guardrails that just interacting with one another, our norms in our consulting that we do. But Philippians 2, 3, and 4 talks about doing nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in everything with humility, consider others as better than yourselves. And that is such a hard thing to do. Let each of you look not only to your own interest, but to the interest of others. When we do this, our motive is pure. When we can truly say that that's what we're doing something in somebody else's best interest and not our own, we will know that our motive is pure. But just like the example that you gave, we're going to know our motive is pure by the response that we get back. If we're looking for a response, if we're looking for accolades, if we're looking for an attaboy and we don't get it, are we upset? Because if we're upset, that's just a clear indication that our heart was just not in the right place. And although we thought we were doing it for somebody else, we're not.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, what you just said about how do we know what our motives are? Because sometimes I think we want to believe, or we actually start off with good motives, but maybe they go south at some point. How do we know that they've gone south? How do we react when we don't get the accolades too? And that anger, that frustration, that should be a good indication to us. If I've got that going on in my life, that should be a major red flag to me to be able to say, I better check my motives. Even though they may have started off pure and good, they may have gone sideways and been to a position where now it's not a humility thing, it's a pride thing. And now my pride is hurt because I'm not getting the recognition that I need. Maybe so that original statement that we made, let's throw this out again, and then maybe you can make some final thoughts on that. The statement that IBL would talk about is humility in a leader is seen in a pattern of sacrificial good works outside of the public eye. And so maybe in the last minute that we have, just maybe elaborate a little bit on the practicality of that and how that looks.
Well, one of the key phrases in that phrase is a pattern. This is not just a one-off. This is how we live our life regularly, that we are humble, that we walk through not expecting the accolades, that I do everything as unto the Lord. I do it for him. I don't do it for anybody else. And therefore, if I don't get accolades, or if my team doesn't get accolades, that's okay. I know then that I'm living in a pattern of humility.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the helpful things is to know that God is a righteous judge. Yeah. And that no one may ever see here on earth, but God always sees, God always knows, God does not forget, God will reward. And I think if I can keep that in my mind, to say no one may ever know that I gave Dawn $10,000 last week, and no one may ever know that. I know, tremendous. I know that God knows that. He knows my heart. He knows my motives. And ultimately, when we're struggling with did anybody get recognition? Did anybody know? We're really struggling with the character and nature of God, that we don't really believe he is a righteous judge who's going to reward us for doing things privately when no one on earth may give us recognition.
Absolutely.
I hope you found this discussion helpful. If anything in this conversation hit home and you want to talk to someone, please visit iblministry.org and contact us. IBL is regularly putting out resources like this one. Please like us on Facebook to be notified when new resources post. I'm your host, Tim Hall, and I hope to see you next time on Leadership for Today.